Somewhere right now, in a quiet town you have never heard of, a killer is sitting at their kitchen table, sipping coffee, believing they got away with it. They have believed that for years. Some of them believed it for decades. And then, without warning, something small. A single accidental text message, one careless slip of the tongue, a routine traffic stop for an expired license plate, tore their entire world apart. These are not cases cracked by brilliant detectives chasing hunches through rain-soaked alleys. These are cases solved by pure, terrifying accident. And by the end of this video, you will understand why fate has a strange sense of humor when it comes to justice. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this remind us that truth can be stranger than fiction. Our first story begins with a marriage that was already dying long before anyone realized someone inside it might be capable of murder. Her name was Stacey. Her husband was named Michael. On the surface, they looked like an ordinary couple raising two daughters. Underneath, the marriage was rotting. Michael struggled with substances and alcohol, and no matter how many times he tried to climb out of that hole, something always pulled him back down. The distance between Stacey and Michael grew wider every month, until finally, they decided the marriage was over. Divorce papers were being prepared. And then, before the ink could dry, tragedy struck first. Stacey told police she found her husband lifeless inside their home. He was only 38 years old. His body was rushed to a hospital, where a doctor concluded he had suffered a heart attack. It was a quiet, forgettable explanation for a devastating loss. But not everyone accepted it so easily. Michael's sister, a woman named Rosie, could not shake the feeling that something did not add up. A healthy man, only 38, dropping dead of a heart attack, felt wrong in her bones. She pushed for an autopsy, desperate for answers. Stacey refused. Rosie, you know he didn't like being cut up in surgery and everything like that, Stacey reportedly told her.
No.
And with those words, the door to the truth was quietly shut. No autopsy was performed. Police had no reason at the time to suspect foul play, so there was no investigation, no forensic search for poison, nothing. Stacey collected $55,000 from her husband's life insurance policy and moved forward with her life. The case, if you could even call it that, was closed before it had ever truly opened. But this was only the beginning. About a year later, Stacey met a man named David Castor. They married in August of 2003, and almost immediately cracks began to form. Stacey had two daughters from her first marriage, and David made it painfully clear that he had no interest in being their father. He already had children of his own. He did not want more responsibility, more mouths to feed, more complications in his life. Stacey did not take that rejection well. And 2 years into their marriage, in August of 2005, a second tragedy unfolded. One that would echo the first in ways no one could ignore. Stacey called 911 in a panic. She said David had locked himself inside their bedroom and would not respond, would not answer, would not come out. I'm just getting a little concerned because I haven't talked to him since 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday when he locked me out of the bedroom, she told the dispatcher. When police broke down that door, they found David lifeless inside. And then, tucked beneath the bed, they discovered something that should never be found in a bedroom. A bottle of antifreeze, tipped on its side, the cap removed. On the nightstand sat 2 glasses. One held cranberry juice. The other held antifreeze. The medical examiner later confirmed antifreeze was present in David's system. It seemed obvious what had happened, but investigators still pressed Stacey about those 2 glasses, sitting side by side like silent witnesses. Stacey explained calmly that she had poured David a glass of cranberry juice before he locked the door. That accounted for 1 glass. But the antifreeze, she insisted she had nothing to do with it. According to her, David must have done it to himself. And at the time, there was nothing to prove otherwise. Once again, Stacey inherited everything. Once again, the case appeared closed. But one detective refused to let it go. His name was Detective Spinelli, and something about Stacey's story gnawed at him relentlessly. My gut was telling me that there was something more going on with this. It just wasn't right, he later said. He pulled the old file on Michael, Stacey's first husband, and laid it beside the file on David. The similarities were chilling. Both men had died suddenly. Both were buried side by side in the very same cemetery. If Michael had also died from antifreeze poisoning, then this was not a tragic coincidence, this was a pattern. And there was only one way to know the truth. They would have to dig him up. Exhuming a body is never a simple decision. It is emotional, legal, and deeply controversial. But Spinelli pushed forward, and investigators unearthed Michael's remains. When the toxicology results came back, they found exactly what they feared, traces of antifreeze in his system just like David. 2 husbands, 2 deaths, the same poison running through both of their bodies. But proving that both men had ingested antifreeze was very different from proving that Stacey had put it there. Spinelli needed something more. He needed her to make a mistake. So he brought her in for questioning, and he showed her a photograph of those 2 glasses sitting on the nightstand. Then he asked a simple, almost harmless question. Did she remember which glass she had poured the cranberry juice into? Stacey looked at the photo, and in that moment, under the weight of memory and fear, she said something no one in that room would ever forget. Well, I poured the the cranberry juice. She tried to correct herself instantly, but it was already too late. The words had left her mouth, and there was no pulling them back. Those of us that were watching the interview went, "Oh my God, that was a Freudian slip that she couldn't control," one investigator later recalled. Stacey screamed that she was being framed, accused the detective of manipulation, and shut the interview down completely. But the damage was done. The walls were closing in and Stacey knew it. So she did something almost unthinkable. She turned her sights on her own daughter. Desperate to escape suspicion, Stacey slipped sleeping pills into a drink meant for her daughter, Ashley. The dose was meant to end her life. Beside Ashley's unconscious body, Stacey placed a typed confession letter, one that claimed Ashley herself had poisoned both men. In the letter, Ashley confesses to the murders of David Castor and Michael Wallace, her own father, giving intricate details as to how she went about poisoning them, an investigator explained. Then Stacey called 911, claiming she had found her own daughter unconscious with a suicide note confessing to double murder. But Ashley survived. And when she woke up, she told police the truth. She never wrote that letter. She had never confessed to anything, because she had done nothing. Investigators searched Stacey's computer and found draft after draft of that same confession letter. The timestamps revealed something Stacey never anticipated. The letters had been written while Ashley was miles away, sitting in a classroom at school. There was no way she could have written them. Stacey was arrested soon after. In 2009, she was found guilty of murdering both of her husbands and attempting to end the life of her own child. She was sentenced to more than 51 years behind bars, undone not by forensic genius, but by a single slip of the tongue she could not take back. Our next story begins with a case so widely known that even a sitting president once mentioned it in a national speech. And yet, for 35 years, nobody had any idea what really happened. Jonelle Matthews was only 12 years old when she vanished from her home in Greeley, Colorado, just 5 days before Christmas in 1984. When her father returned home that night, the house was empty. No sign of a struggle, no broken windows, just silence, and an unbearable absence where his daughter should have been. "Did it occur to you that maybe she had run away?" someone later asked him. "No, because I know my daughter well enough," he answered. Police searched every inch of that house and found almost nothing, except for one detail hidden in the freshly fallen snow outside. Footprints. But not ordinary footprints. Whoever had taken Jonelle had tried to erase their own tracks using a garden rake, dragging it across the snow in an attempt to disappear completely. Investigators kept that detail secret, hoping it might one day help identify the person responsible. Jonelle's photograph was printed on milk cartons across the country. Her disappearance became a symbol of every parent's worst fear. But despite the national attention, despite the search parties, despite the years of tips and leads, nothing ever led anywhere. The case went cold, and it stayed cold for a very long time. Then, one man inserted himself into the story in a way nobody expected. His name was Steve Pankey, and just 1 month after Jonelle vanished, he reached out to investigators. Not to offer helpful information, but to explain that he was worried someone might try to frame him for the crime. "I contacted the Fort Collins FBI office," he said, claiming his father-in-law, a cemetery groundskeeper, had once told him something disturbing, that a police officer had approached him about a body needing burial. The story led nowhere. It sounded almost too strange to be true. And for years, it faded into the background of an already impossible case. In 1994, a decade after she disappeared, Jonelle was officially declared deceased. There was no body, no proof, just an empty legal formality closing a chapter that had never truly been solved. And then, in July of 2019, an oil crew working a routine pipeline dig in a remote field struck something in the ground that should never have been there. Human remains. Tests confirmed what an entire community had feared for 35 years. The remains belonged to Jonelle Matthews. Had it been just a little higher, a half a foot deeper, no one would have ever seen her, one investigator said. "It's divine intervention. That's all it is." The discovery reopened everything. Detectives dusted off decades-old files, reread every witness statement, and one name rose to the surface again and again. Steve Pankey. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Investigators tracked down Pankey's ex-wife, and what she told them changed the entire direction of the case. She described how Pankey forced the family to leave town just 2 days after Jonelle disappeared, how he made her scan radio stations obsessively for updates on the missing girl, how he bought newspaper after newspaper just to follow the story. And then she remembered something she had buried for years. A piece of paper she once found discarded in the trash, written in Pankey's own handwriting. On it, he had noted that the snow outside the Matthews house had been raked. That detail had never been made public. Prosecutors say only the Matthews family, investigators, and presumably the killer knew about them. But apparently Pankey knew, an investigator said. It was the kind of knowledge no innocent bystander should ever possess. And there was one more memory his ex-wife could not shake. Years after Jonelle vanished, Pankey's own son passed away. At the funeral, she claimed he turned to her and said something chilling, that he hoped God had not allowed this tragedy to happen because of Jonelle Matthews. It sounded, to anyone listening, like the words of a man haunted by guilt he could no longer contain. Pankey was arrested. After a lengthy trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His own secrets finally surfacing, quite literally, from the ground itself. Our next story takes us into the mind of a man who thought he had outsmarted the entire justice system for 17 long years. In 1997, in Bullhead City, Arizona, a 38-year-old woman vanished. 5 days later, her body was discovered near the Colorado River. Investigators canvassed the area, questioned everyone they could find, and came away with almost nothing. The case slipped quietly into the pile of unsolved files gathering dust in a records room. Meanwhile, a man named Matthew Gibson quietly packed up his life in Arizona and disappeared into North Carolina. There, he built a life so ordinary it was almost invisible. He never got so much as a parking ticket. For 17 years, not a single officer suspected he had anything to do with that woman's death. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. Then, in early 2014, his phone began buzzing with strange messages. They came from a local Walmart, each one repeating the same automated line. A prescription was ready for pickup for a woman named Anita Townsend. Matthew had never heard that name before. Curious, and perhaps a little unsettled, he searched it online. What he found sent a wave of dread through his entire body. A woman named Anita Townsend had reportedly been murdered. Matthew could not explain why he was receiving messages meant for a murder victim. The texts kept coming. Then came the voicemails, repeating the same reminder about the prescription. Paranoia crept into every corner of his mind. When you have carried a secret for 17 years, even the smallest coincidence can feel like a message from beyond the grave. Here is the detail that made it all so much worse. Back in 1997, when Matthew ended that woman's life, he never actually learned her real name. So when the name Anita Townsend kept appearing on his screen, he convinced himself, with no evidence at all, that this must have been his victim's true identity. somehow reaching out to him from the past. And then, as if fate wanted to push him even further to the edge, a Walmart advertisement arrived in his mailbox. To anyone else, it would have been forgettable junk mail. To Matthew, it felt like confirmation. The texts, the voicemails, and now the mail, all from Walmart, all seemingly targeting him specifically. His mind spiraled into full-blown paranoia. He became convinced that someone knew about the killing, and that they were toying with him, torturing him slowly before finally exposing him. He thought someone that was out to put a hit on him was in the parking lot, one investigator recalled. He was that paranoid. The fear became unbearable, consuming every waking hour, until Matthew decided there was only one way to make it stop. In June of 2014, Matthew walked into a police station and, before anyone even asked him a single question, he began to confess. "Hello? I committed a murder," he said. "Many years ago, it happened in Bullhead City." The detective listened carefully, then reached out to authorities in Arizona. The details matched a case that had gone cold 17 years earlier. When questioned further, Matthew described the night in chilling detail. Meeting the woman, bringing her home, an argument turning violent. "I wanted her to leave. Her name I did not know. So I was going to knock her out and put her outside," he told them. He also told them about Anita Townsend and the messages that had finally broken him. That was when investigators delivered a revelation that made the entire confession even more unsettling. Anita Townsend was not his victim. In fact, they were not even certain she had ever existed at all. "We don't know if an Anita Townsend ever existed. We looked. We weren't able to find anyone by that name," one officer admitted. The prescription messages had simply been a mix-up, meant for someone else entirely, a random administrative error with no connection to the murder whatsoever. Matthew had confessed to a crime because of a ghost that was never really there. He pleaded guilty and, after 17 years of freedom built entirely on silence, he was sentenced to just 10 years in prison. Our next story is about a man who took the life of a police officer and vanished so completely that even 30 years of searching could not find him, until the person he trusted most led investigators right to his door. In 1971, in Atlanta, a 27-year-old officer named James Green was working a night shift at a gas station when two men ambushed him. They stole his badge, his weapon, and then fled into the darkness. Officer Green did not survive. Every police officer in the city took the loss personally. Dozens of them flooded the streets, searching for the men responsible. During that search, they found a younger associate of the attackers, a man named Samuel Cooper, who gave up the names of the two suspects, Twyman Myers and Freddie Hilton. But by the time investigators moved to make their arrests, both men had already slipped out of the city, vanishing into the shadows of a country that suddenly felt far too large to search. Twyman did not last long on the run. He was killed in a shootout with police a few years later. But Freddie Hilton disappeared completely. He resurfaced in New York under a new name, Kamal, and quietly rebuilt his entire identity from nothing. He found a stable job at a phone company. He found a girlfriend. He moved in with her and her young daughter, playing the role of a devoted partner in a life built entirely on a lie. For 30 years, nobody knew where he was. For 30 years, he believed the past could not touch him. But the truth has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. Freddie secretly acted inappropriately toward the young girl living in his household. Eventually, she found the courage to tell her mother. And the mother did exactly what she needed to do. She walked into a police precinct in Brooklyn and reported him. In 2001, a woman and her daughter entered the 69th precinct in Brooklyn, New York, looking to talk to a cop, an investigator recalled. Freddie was arrested under his false name, Kamal. A background check under that name revealed nothing. No record, no red flags, nothing at all. But during the arrest, officers discovered an illegal weapon in his possession, and under the pressure of interrogation, Freddie finally cracked and revealed his true identity. The instant his real name entered the system, everything changed. A national alert appeared. Freddie Hilton was wanted in Atlanta for the killing of Officer James Green 3 decades earlier. New York authorities notified Atlanta immediately. But 30 years is a long time, and investigators had to rebuild a case that had gone cold for a generation. My goals were to meet and find ex-Black Liberation Army members and interview them to see if they could recall and back up some of the story that I had about Freddie Hilton, one detective explained. He tracked down 3 former members of the group, and all 3 confirmed the same account. Freddie was the man who had attacked the officer. In 2003, he was sent back to Atlanta, found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, undone not by a manhunt, but by the very family he thought would keep his secret forever. Our next story feels almost impossible, the kind of coincidence that sounds fabricated until you realize it happened exactly as described. In the summer of 1997, at the Garnet Lake Campground in Michigan, maintenance workers were performing a routine cleaning of an outdoor toilet. As they pumped out the waste, their machine suddenly jammed. Something was blocking it. When they opened the tank to investigate, they discovered the remains of a newborn baby. Police descended on the campground immediately, but there was almost nothing to work with. No identity for the infant. No suspect. No leads of any kind. The surrounding community, devastated by the tragedy, came together and gave the child a name and a proper burial. They called her Baby Garnet. For years, that small grave sat quietly in a local cemetery, a heartbreaking mystery with no answer, hoping desperately that someone, somewhere, would eventually come forward. Nobody ever did. 20 years passed in silence. Then, around 2022, a newly appointed sheriff decided to revisit the case with fresh eyes and new technology. Advances in forensic science now allowed investigators to extract genetic material from baby Garnet's remains and build a broader family tree, hoping it might eventually connect to someone still living. It was a long shot, and then, incredibly, it worked. The lab found a match tied to a young woman named Jenna Jarekowski. Her DNA existed in a database entirely because of something completely unrelated to the case. She had taken a simple at-home ancestry test out of curiosity. I bought one. It's literally you spit in a tube or you swab your mouth, you send it in, and they give you your ancestry results, Jenna later explained. One ordinary afternoon at work, her phone rang. A Michigan detective was on the other end, telling her he had reopened a 25-year-old cold case, and that her DNA was a direct match to the victim. I was like, what case? And he was like, you've heard of the Baby Garnet case, right? And I was like, Jenna recalled. The detective explained that whoever left that baby behind was almost certainly a blood relative of hers. To narrow things down, they tested her mother's DNA next. The results eliminated any doubt about how close the connection truly was, and ended up finding out that it's not a distant relative to my mom, but a direct relative, Jenna said. The trail led directly to Jenna's own grandmother, a woman named Nancy. In July of 2022, at 60 years old, Nancy was arrested. Investigators believe she gave birth at home decades earlier, and that complications during delivery led to the baby's death by asphyxiation. Though prosecutors argued that medical help, if called in time, might have saved the child's life. Instead, Nancy allegedly drove 20 miles from her home and left the newborn at the campground, where she would remain unnamed and unclaimed for a quarter of a century. Nancy's defense team told a very different story. They argued the baby never survived the delivery at all, and that Nancy had no access to a telephone to call for emergency help even if she had wanted to. Both sides disagreed on almost every detail of that night, but they agreed on one undeniable fact. Nancy had left that baby behind at the campground, and that alone was a crime. Her case remains in the courts, and if convicted, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. 2 years after her grandmother's arrest, Jenna posted a video on TikTok explaining the entire story to strangers online. It was viewed more than 15 million times. A quiet family secret suddenly broadcast to the entire world because of a curiosity purchase from an ancestry website. Our next story unfolds across 18 years and 2 crime scenes separated by nothing more than a single quiet neighborhood. In August of 1986, in Edmond, Oklahoma, Gary Larson was home with his girlfriend when he heard strange noises coming from another room. When he got up to investigate, he discovered that someone had sliced through a window screen. The screen was cut in an L shape from top to bottom. Not a big opening, an investigator later described. But the cut screen was the least of their problems. because the intruder responsible for it was still inside the house. Before Gary could react, he was attacked. His fiancée witnessed the entire assault and was harmed as well, though she survived. She called for help the moment the intruder fled, but it arrived too late to save Gary. Investigators combing through the house for evidence found a single footprint left behind. You can see the big toe here and the next toes following right in here, and then down this way would be the backside of the foot, one detective explained. Whoever had done this had been barefoot during the attack. But a footprint alone could not identify a killer, and after 4 years of investigation with no new leads, the case went cold. That photograph of a bare footprint sat quietly in a file for the next 18 years. Then, in 2004, a completely unrelated incident occurred just a short distance from that same house. A young boy was showering when he looked up and saw a man staring through the bathroom window. Terrified, he screamed and ran to tell his father. "So my son was back here to take a shower and looked up through this window and said he saw a man," the father later recounted. Determined to catch whoever it was, the father installed a motion detector outside the bathroom window, waiting for the intruder to return. For weeks later, the alarm went off. The father rushed outside and found a barefoot man hiding in the bushes near the window. "There's this 6'2", 250-pound, 38-year-old man standing back here in the bushes looking in the bathroom window," he recalled. He restrained the man until police arrived. His name was Jonathan Grant, and at first, investigators assumed he was simply a local nuisance with a habit of peeping through windows. They had no idea just how dangerous he truly was. One of the responding officers wanted to see exactly where Jonathan had been hiding, so he walked through the yard to examine the scene for himself. And as he looked around, a memory suddenly surfaced from deep in his career. "But I'm flashed back to a crime scene 18 years cold. A suspected peeping Tom. A torn screen, bare footprints etched in blood," he said. He was standing in the very same neighborhood where Gary Larson had lost his life nearly 2 decades earlier. And this new suspect, Jonathan, had also been caught barefoot. Investigators moved quickly, taking impressions of Jonathan's bare feet and comparing them directly against the 18-year-old crime scene photo. "I was able to locate enough unique identifiers that I could say that this latent impression was made by the same source," a forensic examiner confirmed. "The prints matched perfectly. This is the foot that many people looked for 18 years, one officer said. In 2005, Jonathan Grant pleaded guilty to multiple crimes, including the killing of Gary Larson, and was sentenced to life in prison. Caught not through years of relentless pursuit, but because he could not resist looking through one more window. Our final story proves that even the most cautious fugitive can be undone by something as mundane as a piece of metal bolted to the back of a car. Mohammed was still a teenager when he ended the life of someone he considered a close friend, a young man named Jaffer Tucker. The two of them had been standing together on a train platform in Atlanta when, for reasons that remain unclear to this day, Mohammed turned on him. After the attack, he fled Georgia entirely, resettling in South Carolina under a completely fabricated identity, calling himself Res Seacom. For years, the FBI circulated his photograph and offered rewards for information, but the tips never materialized. 1 year became 10. 10 became 20. Eventually, 28 years passed with the case essentially frozen in place. A decades-old wound that never had the chance to heal because the person responsible had simply vanished from the earth. Then, on August 16, 2022, a deputy in Georgia was running a routine patrol, watching for expired license plates as vehicles passed by on the road. Her scanner automatically checked each registration against the database. One car triggered an alert. The registration had expired. She pulled the driver over, the entire encounter captured on her body camera, completely unaware that she was about to end a fugitive search that had lasted nearly 3 decades. The man handed over identification under the name Res Seacom. But the deputy found additional problems. His license was suspended, and the vehicle had no insurance. Under standard procedure, she had no choice but to place him under arrest. He pleaded with her, insisting he had a family emergency waiting for him. "Sir, I did not know. I have children. I have a sick uncle and I run the household," he said. But she followed protocol regardless, and placed him in handcuffs. At the jail, during routine booking, officers scanned his fingerprints, and in an instant, his entire false identity collapsed. A fingerprint check at the jail identified Seacom as Mohammed Bilal Amin, wanted for the fatal shooting of 18-year-old Jaffer Tucker. The report confirmed. What began as a completely unremarkable traffic stop for an expired plate had somehow ended the search for one of the most elusive fugitives in the region's history. Headlines the following day read that a man wanted for nearly 28 years in an Atlanta murder had finally been captured during a routine traffic stop. Mohammed was extradited back to Atlanta to face the charges that had been waiting for him since he was a teenager. And as of this telling, he remains in custody, awaiting his trial. Each of these people believed they had escaped. Some believed it for 17 years. Some believed it for 30. Some believed it for so long they built entire families, entire careers, entire identities on top of a lie. And in every single case, it was not brilliant detective work or dramatic confrontation that finally brought them down. It was an accident, a wrong text message, a slip of the tongue, a rake dragged across snow, a curious DNA test taken for fun, a bathroom window someone could not resist looking through one more time, a license plate that expired at exactly the wrong moment. The universe, it seems, keeps its own kind of records, and eventually it always seems to collect what is owed. If the story shocked you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There are many more unbelievable true stories waiting for you here.